I was 13 when this happened, old enough to stay home alone, or at least that's what my parents thought. It was a Wednesday in late October, chilly but not yet freezing, and both my parents were working late. I had just gotten back from school, tossed my backpack on the couch, and microwaved some leftover mac and cheese. At the time, we lived in a small single-level house in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio. Nothing ever really happened there. The kind of place where the loudest sound is a leaf blower or a barking dog. I remember feeling weirdly proud that day, like I was finally grown up enough to handle a few hours alone. I even sent a text to my mom saying, "I'm good, enjoy your shift." I was in the living room eating in front of the TV with the volume low. I hadn't even touched my homework yet. I was watching reruns of Mythbusters, waiting for time to pass. That's when I heard the front door open. Not a knock, not a doorbell. Just the click of the knob turning and the door swinging open like someone had a key. My first reaction wasn't fear, it was confusion. I assumed maybe my dad had come home early, but then I heard a voice. A man's voice, rough and low, saying my name in this almost sing-song way. "Ryan? Ryan." It didn't sound like my dad. It didn't sound like anyone I knew. I peeked my head just enough to see the hallway, and that's when I saw him. A man I'd never seen before, wearing a dirty utility uniform, like something an electrician or plumber might wear. His shirt was untucked, sleeves rolled up, and there was this faded patch on his chest, but I couldn't make out what it said. He had a thick beard, and his skin looked weathered, like someone who worked outside a lot. But what really got me was what he was holding. A long, rusted crowbar hanging loosely at his side. He moved slowly, almost too casually, like he had all the time in the world. And then he said again, louder this time, "Where is he?" My stomach dropped. I didn't think. I just moved. There was a small coat closet near the hallway, barely big enough for a few jackets and some boots. But I squeezed in and pulled the door shut behind me as quietly as I could. I turned off my phone screen, held my breath, and just listened. His footsteps creaked over the wood floor, getting closer, then fading, then closer again. He started opening doors one by one, muttering to himself. Where is he? He was supposed to be here. It wasn't even angry. It was just certain. Like he believed I should be somewhere, and he was annoyed I wasn't in plain sight. Every creak of the floor felt like it was right outside the closet. I remember pressing my hands against my knees so hard they went numb. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. At one point, I heard him open the hallway bathroom. The door creaked, then slammed shut hard enough to rattle the walls. I winced. He muttered something I couldn't quite catch, like a string of angry complaints. Then there was silence. Not total silence. I could still hear the refrigerator humming and a car passing outside. But inside the house, it was dead quiet. No footsteps. No doors. Nothing. That kind of quiet is worse than noise because your brain starts filling in the blanks. I sat there frozen, listening for the tiniest clue. That's when I heard something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. He whispered, real low, "I know you're in here," like he was standing right on the other side of the closet door. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just shut my eyes and begged whatever was out there not to find me. Then, just as suddenly as it all started, the front door opened again. I heard the hinges creak, then nothing. A minute passed, then another. I didn't trust it. I waited a full 10 minutes before I moved, counting in my head, trying to calm my breathing. When I finally crept out of the closet, the house looked untouched. Nothing broken, nothing stolen. But the back door, which we never used, was slightly open, just enough to let in a breeze. I locked every door and window in the house and called my mom. I couldn't even keep my voice steady. She told me to get to a neighbor's place immediately, and I did. I ran the entire way barefoot, carrying my phone in one hand. Our neighbor, Mrs. Landry, was this sweet older woman who always baked cookies for the holidays. She looked confused when she opened the door, but let me in without question once she saw my face. I stayed with her until my parents got home and the police arrived about 30 minutes later. They searched the house, checked for fingerprints, and took my statement. One of the officers, I think his name was Officer McClellan, asked me over and over if I recognized the man or saw what company the uniform was from. I told him everything, down to the crowbar and the stitched patch I couldn't read. The weirdest part? They confirmed that no repair or utility crews had been scheduled for our area that day. Not on our street. Not even in the neighborhood. And when they checked the locks, they said there were no signs of forced entry. It was like the guy had a key, or knew exactly how to get in. That night, I couldn't sleep. Even with both my parents home and every lock double-checked, I kept hearing phantom footsteps in the hallway. Any little creak sent my heart into my throat. My dad tried to reassure me, saying it was probably just some unstable guy trying his luck. Maybe someone high or mentally unwell. But that didn't explain how he knew my name, or why he was walking through our house like he'd been there before. My mom was more shaken than she let on. I caught her crying quietly in the kitchen after she thought I'd gone to bed. That image stayed with me, her wiping her eyes with a dish towel, staring at the back door like it might swing open again. The next day, they had a locksmith come out and change every lock in the house, including the windows. We also got a security system installed that same week. The weirdest part was that nothing ever came of the investigation. No suspects. No footage from neighbors. No similar reports nearby. It was like whoever he was, he just vanished. I asked about the patch on his shirt, if maybe it could be traced, and the cop just said, "Could have been thrifted or fake." The way he said it made it clear he didn't expect an answer anytime soon. But the officer did tell my parents something before leaving that night. He said there had been a few strange calls over the past month, just vague reports of people in uniform knocking on doors, asking for people who didn't live there, like they were fishing. It's been a few years now and I've never seen that man again. Never heard anything else about it. But sometimes I wonder if he really was looking for me. Not just some random house. He knew my name. He moved through the house like he'd been there before. And he didn't take anything. That part gets me the most. He didn't seem interested in stealing. He was looking for someone. For me. It felt personal. And that makes it so much worse. I still think about that whisper outside the closet door. "I know you're in here." Not angry, not loud, just confident. Like he wasn't in a rush. Like he wanted me to hear him. I haven't told many people this story, mostly because it makes me sound paranoid. But if you've ever had that moment, that cold, silent certainty that you're being hunted in your own home, you know exactly what I felt. I'm older now. I lock everything. I don't answer doors I'm not expecting. And I don't think I'll ever feel truly safe alone again. I was 19 when it happened. Freshman year at a small community college in Oregon, living in a rented house off campus with 2 other girls who were barely ever home. I was the quiet one, worked part-time at a bookstore, studied a lot, didn't go out much. That particular weekend, both my roommates were visiting their families, and I stayed behind to catch up on an essay. The house was older, built in the 70s, with creaky floors, thin windows, and a weirdly placed landline phone in the hallway. One of those relics no one ever uses, but we kept it plugged in just in case our parents needed to reach us and couldn't get through on our cells. I honestly forgot it even worked, until that night. It was a Saturday, sometime after 7 p.m. The sky had already gone that deep blue color, and the street outside was quiet, just the occasional bark from the neighbor's dog or a car driving by. I was in my room halfway through rewriting a paragraph for my sociology paper when the landline rang. That phone never rang. Ever. I remember freezing for a second, trying to figure out what the sound even was. I thought maybe it was the smoke detector beeping at first. When I realized it was the hallway phone, I hesitated. I didn't answer it. Something about it just felt off. So I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, curiosity got the best of me, and I went to check the message. The hallway was dim. One of the bulbs in the ceiling fixture had burned out days earlier, and the remaining light cast this gross yellow tone on everything. I picked up the receiver, pressed the voicemail button, and stood there listening with one foot twitching nervously on the hardwood floor. What I heard still doesn't make sense to me, even now. It was a girl, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. Her voice was shaky, whispering between sobs. Please help me. I don't know where I am. I think it's a basement. I ran away. He's looking for me." Then there was a pause. Some kind of rustling, like fabric or boxes being shifted. And she added, "I heard someone upstairs. Please, if you get this, help me." I froze. My chest tightened so hard it felt like someone had clamped my ribs. The message cut off right there. I played it again. The exact same words, the exact same fear in her voice. It didn't sound fake. It didn't sound like a prank. It had that raw panic only someone truly terrified could pull off. I stood there gripping the receiver, trying to process what the hell I was supposed to do. Was it an accident? A wrong number? Should I call the police? I was still standing there debating it when I heard the knock. It wasn't a loud knock, just 2 quick taps, almost casual. But at that moment, it felt deafening. I peeked out the front window cautiously, keeping the curtain barely cracked. There was a man standing on the porch, mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Tall, but not intimidatingly so. He wore a gray hoodie with the hood down, jeans, and scuffed sneakers. His hands were in his pockets, and he kept glancing back toward the street like he was waiting on something. My stomach dropped. Something about him didn't sit right. Too still, too expectant. Then he spoke, and my blood turned cold. "Hi, sorry to bother you," he called out, looking toward the door but not raising his voice much. "I'm looking for my dog. She ran off earlier this afternoon. Little black lab, name's Daisy. Just wondering if you've seen her in the neighborhood?" On the surface, nothing about what he said was threatening, but the moment he opened his mouth, I recognized the voice. Not the tone or the pitch, the voice. It was the same voice from the voicemail, except it wasn't a little girl. It was his. I felt this wave of confusion and panic hit me all at once. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I backed away from the window and stood completely still, like maybe if I didn't move, he wouldn't know I was home. But then came the second knock. Louder this time, more forceful. "Sorry, don't mean to bug you," he said again. "Just trying to get her back before it gets dark." That voice, it had the same rhythm, the same slight rasp on the S sounds. It was like he'd recorded himself pretending to be a child and left it on my voicemail. But why? And how did he know I was here? Or worse, was he already inside? I tiptoed back to my room and locked the door, which suddenly felt like the flimsiest piece of wood in the world. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering everything I could to the dispatcher. The message, the man at the door, the matching voice. She told me to stay put, keep the door locked, and that officers were already on the way. I stayed on the line, crouched behind my bed, trying to keep my breathing quiet. The dispatcher kept asking if I could still see him, but I didn't dare go check. Minutes crawled by like hours. I kept thinking, what if he knows the back door's unlocked? What if that message was bait, and I'm already trapped? I don't know how long I crouched there, but eventually I heard footsteps on the porch again. Not heavy like boots, but deliberate, slower. Then nothing. No more knocks. No voice. Just silence. I remember whispering to the dispatcher, "I think he's gone." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. My eyes were locked on the bedroom doorknob, just waiting for it to move. Then, headlights. I saw the flicker of blue and red against my wall, and I nearly burst into tears. I ran to the front window, cracked the blinds, and saw 2 patrol cars pulling up. The officers scanned the yard with flashlights, one of them motioning toward the side of the house. I opened the door only when they told me to. I was shaking so bad my voice cracked, explaining everything, even playing the voicemail for them. They took it seriously. One of the officers had this look on his face like he'd heard something similar before, but he didn't say much. They checked the perimeter, found a footprint in the backyard under the window that faces the living room. Said it matched the tread pattern of a Converse sneaker, which matched what the guy was wearing. But that was it. No sign of him. No lost dog, no car nearby, just gone. Like he vanished. The next day, I showed the voicemail to one of my roommates. She played it twice, frowning, and then said, "Wait, that girl's voice sounds like that TikTok filter thing, you know?" And that's when it hit me. He'd used some kind of voice modulator to leave the message. That's how he sounded so convincingly like a kid. The trap wasn't just physical, it was digital. He used the voicemail to get me to open the door, to get me to step outside. And if I had answered sooner, if I had gone looking, I don't know what would have happened. I still don't. After that, we unplugged the landline for good. I installed cameras the next day. I also got a dog, a real one, a German shepherd named Cleo who barks at everything that moves. I never got another call like that, and the police never found anyone matching the guy's description. But I still have the voicemail saved in my email, like some messed up souvenir. Some nights when I can't sleep, I'll replay it. Not because I want to, but because I need to remind myself that what happened was real. Because the scariest part isn't that he tried to trick me, it's that it probably worked on someone else. I was 13 when it happened, and my little brother Jake was 9. It was the middle of July and we were on summer break, just the 2 of us at home that afternoon. Our parents were both working. Mom's a nurse and Dad's a delivery driver, so sometimes we'd have these windows of a few hours alone. Nothing unusual. We lived in a quiet neighborhood outside of Spokane, Washington, where kids rode bikes and everyone waved to each other. Back then, I was really into drawing anime characters, and Jake spent most of his time building insane Lego cities all over the living room floor. That day started like any other. It didn't feel off. Not yet. It was around 2 p.m. when someone knocked on the front door. Not rang, knocked. And it wasn't polite either. It was sharp and fast, like someone was in a hurry. I remember pausing my music and walking over, expecting maybe a package or a neighbor. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a woman standing there. She looked to be in her mid-30s, wearing a big sun hat and oversized sunglasses, the kind you see in movies when someone doesn't want to be recognized. She was smiling, but something about it felt stiff, like it wasn't reaching her eyes. Jake came up behind me asking who it was, and I remember whispering, "Shh," instinctively. She spoke before I even opened the door, just loud enough to hear through the wood. "Hi, sorry to bother you. Are your parents home?" That question hit me weird. Not, "Is your mom or dad home?" Both parents, plural. And she was looking straight into the peephole, like she knew someone was behind it. I hesitated. I didn't answer. She waited a beat, then added, "I think I used to work with your dad. Is this the Henderson house?" "We're not the Hendersons." I didn't respond. I grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him away from the door slowly. He asked again, "Who is it?" and I told him I didn't know, but we weren't answering. We waited in silence for what felt like 5 minutes, until I finally peeked through the blinds in the front room. She was gone, or at least I thought she was. The front porch was empty. No car in the driveway, no movement. I was about to breathe again when Jake called me from the kitchen. He was staring out the side window. "There's a guy walking around the backyard," he said, voice low and shaking. I rushed over. There was a man, maybe late 30s, wearing a neon orange vest like the ones utility workers wear. But the weird thing was, he didn't have any tools. No clipboard, no badge, nothing. Just the vest and black gloves. The second I saw the guy, every hair on my body stood up. He was walking real slow, scanning the windows like he was trying to see inside. I remember the way he looked up toward the kitchen window, where Jake and I were barely peeking out from behind the curtain. For a moment, I thought he saw us. He stopped, tilted his head slightly, then started walking toward the back door like he belonged there. Like it was his house. I grabbed Jake by the wrist and we backed away quietly, hearts pounding. I whispered to him, "We need to hide, right now." He didn't ask questions, just followed me. I knew we had to get to my parents' room. It was the only one with a lock that actually worked. We rushed down the hallway, closed the door gently, and I shoved the lock into place. I could hear the faint creak of our wooden back steps outside. The guy was out there right behind the house. I told Jake to get under the bed while I dug through my mom's nightstand for her old cell phone. She kept it as an emergency backup, and thank God, it still had battery. I called 911 with my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. I told them everything: the woman at the door, the guy in the vest, the fact that we were home alone and hiding. While I was still on the line with the dispatcher, we heard the first attempt at the back door. It wasn't a knock. It was a shove. Heavy and quick, like someone testing to see if it was unlocked. Then again, louder. Jake flinched under the bed and I covered the phone's mic with my hand, whispering, "He's trying to get in." The dispatcher stayed calm, told me to stay hidden and that officers were already en route. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, but what scared me more was the complete silence after the second shove. No voices, no footsteps, just silence, like they were waiting for something. About a minute later, there was this soft knock on the side wall of the house. Not at a door or window, but literally on the siding. It was so quiet, it took me a second to register it. Then again, but on a different wall. They were circling the house, tapping. I don't know if it was to spook us or communicate with each other. I felt paralyzed. Jake reached out from under the bed and grabbed my ankle. He was crying but staying quiet. The dispatcher kept asking me if I could still hear them, and I whispered, "Yeah, they're still here. I think they're going around the house. I don't know how many there are." I stayed on the phone with 911 until I heard the faintest sound of tires on gravel. Then came the siren, distant, but getting louder. That's when we heard footsteps again. This time, fast ones. Running. The guy must have bolted through the backyard because I heard the gate clang as it slammed shut. A few seconds later, the woman reappeared on the front lawn, and through the slit in the curtain, I saw her take off the hat and throw it in a bush before speed-walking down the street like nothing happened. A silver SUV was idling at the corner. She got in. They were gone before the first patrol car even turned onto our block. 2 officers showed up and cleared the house. Jake and I stayed locked in my parents' room until one of them knocked and called out our names. I don't think I've ever felt relief like that in my life. I came out first, hands shaking, trying to explain everything through a mess of words and adrenaline. They took us outside, checked the locks, took our statements, and said they'd put out a bolo for a man in an orange vest and a woman possibly in disguise. That phrase stuck with me. In disguise. It made the whole thing feel even more surreal, like we'd been tricked by people playing a part. Later that night, when our parents got home and heard everything, My dad sat down with us and told us about something he'd seen online. A warning from another neighborhood a few towns over. Apparently, a couple had been targeting houses that looked like no one was home. No adult cars in the driveway. No lights on in certain rooms. One of them would knock or try to talk to whoever answered. And if it was just kids, they'd find a way in. It was always the same MO. A friendly woman asking about someone, a man pretending to be a utility worker, gloves, no tools, and then the attempt. To this day, they were never caught. At least not that we know of. Every now and then I check local crime forums or Reddit to see if anyone's had a similar experience. A few stories pop up here and there. A couple in disguise, always checking for cars, always testing doors. It still messes with my head sometimes, knowing how close they got. If Jake hadn't seen the guy in the backyard when he did, I don't know how that day would have ended. We got lucky, and I've never answered a knock on the door the same way again. I was living alone in a small rental house just off campus in Portland, Oregon, during my junior year of college. The house wasn't anything special, single-level, creaky floors, a tiny kitchen, but it was cheap and close enough to walk to class, which made it perfect at the time. My schedule was packed with early lectures and late-night study sessions, so I got into a habit of waking up around 6 a.m. every day to get a head start on work. That's how I first started noticing him. Every single morning at exactly 6:17 a.m., a man would walk past my living room window with a huge black dog on a red leash. He never looked inside, never broke pace, just walked by. Always the same direction, always the same time. At first I didn't think anything of it. Plenty of people walked their dogs early around that neighborhood, but this guy stood out. He was tall, maybe 6'4", with this stiff posture, like his spine was too straight. He wore a gray hoodie, pulled tight around his face no matter the weather, and he walked like he was late for something. Quick, mechanical strides, never stopping, never glancing around. The dog was huge, something like a Great Dane or a Black Mastiff, but it never barked or even sniffed the ground like normal dogs. It just trotted alongside him, silent and still. I started calling them the shadow pair in my head, just to amuse myself. After about 2 weeks of seeing him at the same time every single day, I started to expect him. I'd sip my coffee near the window and wait for 6:17, like clockwork. One morning, out of curiosity, I opened the curtain just a second earlier than usual, and I swear he was already looking directly at my window, just standing there, not walking, just staring. The second I locked eyes with him, he tugged the leash and kept moving. I laughed it off, told myself it was coincidence, but that moment stuck with me for the rest of the day. And the next morning, he was walking again. Same pace. Like nothing happened. It was around that time I started to feel off. Nothing big, just little things. I'd find the back gate slightly ajar when I swore I closed it. My front porch light flickered a couple nights in a row. One morning my mailbox was wide open, even though I hadn't checked it in 2 days. Dumb stuff. Stuff I told myself was just me being tired or forgetful. I was juggling 2 jobs, a full course load, and barely sleeping. It made sense to be a little scattered. But I still started locking my doors a little earlier, double-checking the windows before bed. Not because I thought I was in danger, more like an itch I couldn't scratch, a tension I couldn't explain. About a week later, I pulled an all-nighter working on a midterm paper. It was one of those nights where time stops making sense. You blink and suddenly it's 2 a.m. I was exhausted, wired on caffeine, and too mentally drained to keep going. So I shut my laptop, brushed my teeth, and dragged myself to bed. I remember thinking something felt different, but I was too tired to care. What I didn't realize until the next morning is that I forgot to lock the back door. It was one of those little details that slipped through the cracks. I always locked it. Always. But that night, I didn't. And that tiny mistake changed everything. At exactly 3:03 a.m., I woke up to the sound of panting. Not like someone out of breath, more like the heavy, rhythmic panting of a large animal. My bedroom was pitch dark, but my eyes were wide open. The sound was so real I could feel the air catch in my chest. For a few seconds I stayed completely still, trying to figure out if it was part of a dream. But then I heard it again. Closer. More distinct. And then, a low creak from the direction of the kitchen. That house had floors that groaned under the weight of anything heavier than a cat. Someone was in there. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it felt like I was going to pass out. I sat up as quietly as I could and reached for my phone, which, of course, was across the room on my desk. As I stood, I froze. The kitchen light was on. I could see the faint yellow glow bleeding under the hallway door. And then I saw a shadow. Long. Still. Like someone was just standing there. That's when it clicked. The panting hadn't stopped. But I didn't hear pause. No collar jingle, no scratching on the floor. Just breath. Just a man's heavy breathing, like he'd been walking for miles and finally stopped to rest. I crept closer to the door and pressed my ear to it, barely breathing. That's when I heard something I will never forget. A soft voice, low and cracked, like it hadn't been used in days. He whispered, "Where's your dog?" I didn't have a dog. I've never had a dog in my life. But something about the way he asked it, like he was genuinely confused, it chilled me to the bone. I backed away from the door and started dialing 911 with trembling hands. No signal. Typical for that area. I considered climbing out my bedroom window, but it was old and jammed and made the loudest screeching noise when opened. I was stuck. Trapped in a 900-square-foot house with someone, or something, that clearly wasn't just a random intruder. I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a ceramic lamp from my nightstand, and braced myself in the corner, staring at the door, waiting for it to move. Minutes passed. Or maybe it was just seconds. Time stopped making sense. I stayed there barely blinking, lamp in hand, expecting the door to swing open at any second. But it didn't. The kitchen light went off suddenly. Not a click, just complete darkness, like someone unscrewed the bulb or killed the power to that one room. And the breathing? It stopped. Dead silence. That kind of silence where your ears start ringing. I couldn't tell if he was gone, if he was still there, or if he was waiting for me to move first. My skin was crawling. Every inch of my body was screaming for me to run, to get out. But I couldn't make my legs work. Eventually, I inched toward my bedroom window and forced it open with both hands, ignoring the screeching sound. I didn't care if he heard me anymore. I needed out. I slipped through it awkwardly, scraping my shin on the sill and landing hard in the flower bed outside. I sprinted barefoot across the side yard, my phone clutched in my hand, and ran 3 houses down to my neighbor Lydia's place. She was a middle-aged widow who always left her porch light on. I banged on her door like a lunatic until she opened it in her robe, terrified. I practically shoved past her, sobbing, yelling something about, "He's in my house," and "no dog." I must have looked insane. The police showed up 10 minutes later. I watched them go through my place from Lydia's living room, wrapped in a blanket and shaking. They didn't find anyone inside. Nothing broken, nothing taken. But the back door was wide open. And the weirdest thing? There were wet footprints on the kitchen floor, big ones, like a man's boots. And in the corner, near the fridge, they found a red nylon dog leash. Just the leash, no tags, no collar, no dog hair. They bagged it for evidence but never found prints, DNA, nothing. Just an empty house with signs someone had definitely been there. They took my statement and said they'd keep a patrol car nearby for a few nights. I didn't sleep for the next 3 days. Every sound made me flinch. I left the lights on in every room, slept with a hammer under my pillow. But the man never came back. No more 6:17 dog walks, no more gray hoodie. Just gone, like it never happened. I even asked around the neighborhood. No one else had seen a man walking a dog at that time in the morning. No one recognized my description. It was like I had imagined the whole thing, except for the leash. I still think about that leash. A few weeks later, I moved out. I couldn't stay there, not after that. Every time I walked past the kitchen, I felt like he was still standing there in the corner, just out of view. I'd flinch at shadows and wake up gasping from dreams where I'd hear panting right behind me. My parents helped me break the lease early, and I crashed at my cousin's place until I found a room in a shared apartment closer to campus. It was louder, more chaotic, but I slept better surrounded by other people. I needed that noise, TVs in other rooms, music through the walls, just to remind myself I wasn't alone. I never got a follow-up from the police. They told me they didn't have enough to go on. No break-in, no stolen property, no fingerprints, no ID on the man. Just a leash and a scared girl with a half-written essay and a busted window screen. I even tried to find out if there had been other incidents nearby. Break-ins, prowlers, anything, but nothing matched. It was like my case existed in a vacuum. Eventually, I stopped asking questions. But not because I wasn't curious. I just didn't want to invite whatever that was back into my life. I started locking everything, double-checking every door, every night. To this day, I still wake up at 3:03 a.m. sometimes. Not every night, just often enough to make me wonder. I'll lie there in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, ears straining for any sound. I haven't heard the panting again. Haven't seen the gray hoodie or that silent, massive dog. But there's always this fear in the back of my head. What if he was never really there for the dog? What if the dog was never real at all? Just a reason to be outside, to be seen without suspicion, to map out routines? And what if I hadn't woken up that night? I keep the leash. I don't know why. It's in a Ziploc bag, buried in a box in my closet. Sometimes I tell myself it's proof, just in case anyone ever doubts me. But deep down, I think I keep it because if it ever disappears, I'll know he came back. I'm not the kind of guy who scares easily. I'm 41, single dad, work in HVAC, and I've been living in the same two-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside of St. Louis for almost 5 years now. It's the kind of area where people still wave from their driveways and argue about lawn heights. My daughter Ellie is 10. She spends most weekdays with her mom since the divorce, but weekends are ours. Movies on the couch, pancakes in the morning, that kind of thing. The day this happened, a Wednesday, she wasn't with me, and thank God for that. It started early, around 6:10 a.m. I remember the time because I was rushing to get dressed and almost forgot to let the dog out. I was brushing my teeth when I heard a knock, 3 sharp raps on the front door. That alone was weird. No one knocks around here that early. I assumed it was a neighbor needing a jump, or maybe a package delivery gone wrong. I wiped my mouth, pulled on a hoodie, and went to check it out. When I opened the door, there was this man standing there, mid-50s, maybe older, white guy, wiry frame, grayish beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in a while. He was wearing this oversized denim jacket with torn cuffs, and underneath I saw a faded high school football sweatshirt with holes in the sleeves. His eyes were glassy and unfocused, like he hadn't slept right in weeks. He just stared at me for a second and then said, "I used to live here. I just want to look around." I was caught off guard. I half laughed, like maybe he was joking or drunk. "Sorry, man," I said, keeping the screen door shut. "That's not really gonna happen." but he didn't move. He looked past me, toward the hallway, then out toward the side gate. "I know you've got the old tree still in the backyard, with the bent limb, and the rose bush my wife planted near the porch." His voice cracked on the word wife. I shook my head and told him again, firmer this time, that he needed to leave. That's when his tone changed. He got this desperate look in his eye and repeated my exact address out loud. Street number, street name, zip code. Then he muttered, "This was supposed to be ours forever." I stood there for a second, not sure what to say. Something about the way he said it made the hair on my arms stand up. I told him I was calling the police if he didn't leave. And finally, after a long pause, he turned around and walked off. Slow, like he didn't want to go. He kept glancing over his shoulder, and I stayed at the door until he turned the corner and disappeared down the street. I watched him go with this gnawing feeling in my gut. He didn't seem drunk. He wasn't aggressive exactly, more like unhinged. The kind of guy who might come back. I should have trusted that instinct more. I went to work like normal, but I couldn't get the guy out of my head. I kept replaying what he said about the tree in the backyard, the rose bush. He wasn't wrong. The bent limb was still there. I'd meant to trim it for months. And Ellie and I always joked about how those roses never died, even in the winter. By the time I got through my second job site that afternoon, I had this itch in my chest, like something was off at the house. I even thought about calling my neighbor to check, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. It's easy to second-guess yourself when nothing technically happened. I got home just after 5:30 p.m. The first thing I noticed was that the side gate was wide open. Now I always latch it. Always. And my stomach dropped when I saw it swinging. I ran up the steps and unlocked the front door, heart already pounding, and everything looked fine in the living room. Nothing broken, nothing stolen. But when I turned the corner into the kitchen, I saw it. The back door was busted open. The wood around the lock splintered like someone kicked it in. I didn't even think. I grabbed the crowbar from the hall closet and shouted out, "Hello!" I don't know what I expected. Maybe someone hiding, maybe no one. I checked the downstairs, room by room, heart in my throat. Nothing. Then I climbed the stairs, crowbar in hand, trying to listen past the sound of my own breathing. When I got to Ellie's room, the door was half closed. I pushed it open slowly. That's when I saw him. That same man. From the morning. He was lying in my daughter's bed, curled up on top of the blanket, shoes still on. In his arms, like some kind of teddy bear, was this dusty wooden box. The top was cracked open, and inside were dozens of faded photos, pictures of a family. A much younger version of him, a woman with dark hair, 2 little boys. And he was just sleeping. I didn't move. I just stood there, frozen in the doorway. It wasn't fear at that point. It was something stranger. A mix of confusion, disbelief, and this overwhelming discomfort, like I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see. The guy looked peaceful in a way that made everything feel even more wrong, like he belonged there, like I was the one intruding. I finally snapped out of it and said loudly, "Hey, you need to get up, now." He jolted awake, blinked fast like he didn't recognize where he was. Then he looked at me, really looked, and started crying. He kept apologizing over and over, hands up like I had a gun pointed at him. "I didn't take anything," he said. "I swear. I just wanted to see it again. Just wanted to feel it." I told him I was calling the cops, and he didn't argue. Just sat there on the edge of Ellie's bed, still clutching the box, eyes red and sunken. He started rambling. Said his name was Don, that he'd bought this house with his wife back in '98, raised his sons here, that the house had been taken from them during a foreclosure in 2009. His wife had left after that. One of the kids joined the army. The other, he said, didn't talk to him anymore. "This house," he muttered, "was the last place we were happy. When the police arrived, they handled it better than I expected. One officer stayed with me while the other gently led Don out of the bedroom. He didn't resist. He just kept saying, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean no harm." They found a spot in the woods behind the neighborhood where he'd been sleeping. Some makeshift tent, old food wrappers, even a pair of binoculars. Turns out he'd been watching the house for weeks. That's what got to me the most. That while I was inside, watching TV, doing dishes, tucking Ellie in, he'd been out there, looking in. They didn't press charges. I guess they saw it more as a mental health situation. I changed all the locks that weekend and installed cameras. Ellie doesn't know what happened, and I don't plan on telling her. But every time I walk past her room, I think about him lying there, holding on to those photos like it was the only thing keeping him together. I didn't understand it fully then, but now I think I do. Some people don't break into places just to steal. They break in because they're trying to go back to something they lost. Something that time won't give back. It's been 8 months since that happened. I still see him sometimes in my dreams. Not in a violent way. He's just standing in the backyard, near the bent tree, looking up at the window. I don't know if it's guilt or just the strangeness of it all lingering, but I double-check the locks every night now. Not just because I'm afraid someone might break in again, but because I know someone already did. And he didn't come for money. He came for memories. I was 26 when I moved into my first apartment alone. A one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an older brick building just outside of Minneapolis. It wasn't anything fancy, but it had these huge windows that let in a ton of light, and the rent was low enough that I could manage it on my own. At the time, I had just gotten promoted at the veterinary clinic I worked at, so I was feeling that rare mix of stressed and proud. My mom came with me that day to help with the move since my dad had passed a few years back, and it was just kind of our thing now. She always helped me set up new spaces. It was a Saturday in early September, still warm, but with that crisp air that hinted fall was coming. Most of the day was just the usual chaos, boxes everywhere, furniture halfway assembled, and that weird silence you get when a place hasn't been lived in yet. At some point while dragging a box labeled kitchen stuff down the hall from the elevator, I noticed a guy standing a few doors down. He looked like he was in his 30s, scruffy beard, wearing a faded green hoodie and black jeans. Not someone I'd remember in any other context. He gave me a polite smile and said, "Moving in?" I laughed and said, "Yeah, clearly." He nodded and added, "I'm just helping a friend move out from 3C. I didn't think much of it. Apartment buildings always have someone coming or going. We didn't chat more than a minute or two before I went back to my chaos. Later that afternoon, after hours of unpacking and breaking down boxes, my mom left to pick up some groceries. I told her I was going to shower and maybe nap before doing anything else. My phone was dead from all the calls and GPS use during the move, so I plugged it in and headed to the bathroom. That was probably my favorite part of the apartment, the deep clawfoot tub, and the way the steam hung in the old tiles. I let the hot water run for a while before stepping in, letting myself just zone out for a bit. For the first time all day, the noise and mess faded, and I finally felt like I was really alone. It was a good kind of quiet. That's why I nearly slipped when I heard the front door close. Not slam, just a soft, unmistakable click. For a second, my brain filled in the blanks. Mom must have come back and didn't call out. Maybe her hands were full. I turned off the shower, grabbed a towel, and called out, "Mom!" No answer. I stepped carefully out, water dripping everywhere, and padded into the hallway, expecting to see her setting down bags in the kitchen. Instead, my stomach dropped. There, standing by the counter, like it was the most normal thing in the world, was the guy from earlier. The one from the hallway. He was holding something in his hand, fiddling with it. I squinted. It was a key ring. My key ring. He looked up, smiled, and said calmly, "I just wanted to see how you were settling in." I froze. Not just in that cliché horror movie way. I mean actually froze. My brain couldn't decide whether to panic or pretend this wasn't happening. I was standing there dripping wet in just a towel, staring at a man I'd barely spoken to, now inside my apartment, holding my keys. My heart was thudding so loud it felt like it was in my ears. He didn't move toward me, just kept standing there like it was the most casual thing in the world. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said, tilting his head a bit, like I was the one acting weird. "Door was open, just thought I'd check in." But the door wasn't open. I'd heard it close. I took a step back, slowly, like if I moved too fast it'd trigger something. My mind was racing. The keys. I hadn't unpacked them yet. I knew they were in one of the boxes near the front door. The box had been sealed with blue painter's tape, labeled entryway. He must have opened it, dug through it. That meant he'd been in here while I was in the shower. Maybe longer. My skin crawled. I tried to sound normal, like I wasn't unraveling. "I think you should leave," I said, gripping my towel tighter. He didn't budge. "You don't remember me, do you?" he said, as if that explained anything. "We talked earlier." His tone was friendly, even soft, and that made it worse. I turned and walked, fast but not running, straight into the bedroom, locked the door behind me, and immediately started scanning for my phone. It was still charging in the living room. Of course it was. I couldn't hear anything from the other side of the door. No footsteps, no movement, just silence. My window overlooked the back alley and had a fire escape. One of the reasons I chose this unit. I yanked it open, heart hammering, and crawled out barefoot onto the rusty metal platform. I didn't even take time to get dressed. Just climbed down as fast as I could, my wet feet slipping on the metal, nearly losing the towel once on the second level. My only goal was get out. I ran around the building barefoot and into the corner liquor store where I'd seen people earlier in the day. The guy behind the counter took one look at me, drenched, trembling, half-naked, and grabbed his phone before I even said a word. I could barely talk. I remember saying something like, "There's a man in my apartment. I don't know him. He has my keys." The guy handed me the phone with 911 already dialed. I gave them the address, barely holding it together. The clerk gave me one of those oversized t-shirts they sell for $7.99 and some paper towels for my feet. It felt surreal, like none of it was happening to me, just something I was watching from outside my own body. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I stayed in the back of the store, wrapped in that oversized t-shirt, trying to explain what had happened to two officers while still shaking uncontrollably. They went up to my apartment with one of the store clerks who'd seen the guy around the neighborhood before. But when they got there, he was gone. No sign of him. The front door had been closed but not locked. Inside, my unpacked boxes were rifled through, especially the ones near the entryway. That's when one of the officers held up the box I'd labeled entryway and showed me the ripped tape. My spare keys were gone, except for the set he had been holding when I saw him. They'd been placed neatly on the counter. That detail messed with me more than anything else. He didn't take the keys. He returned them, like it had just been part of some visit, a routine. The officers swept the apartment and then checked the building's security footage. That's when we found out how he'd gotten in. The main lobby door had been propped open with a folded pizza box, probably for movers, and he'd just walked in like anyone else. No forced entry. Nothing suspicious enough to raise alarm. The guy had even taken the elevator like a tenant. We found footage of him walking down my hallway a few hours before I met him, long before I arrived. He'd been inside the building for a while. They never found out his name. No ID, no apartment number linked to him. Just a blurry image from the lobby camera and my description. I stayed at my mom's that night and honestly, for a lot of nights after that. I had the locks changed, got a second deadbolt installed, and started keeping a chair under the handle every night like I used to do in college. For weeks, every little sound felt like him coming back. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., sure someone was in the kitchen. I didn't sleep properly for months. And even now, almost a year later, I still get this tight feeling in my chest when I hear soft footsteps in a hallway. Like part of me is still standing there, fresh out of the shower, staring at a stranger in my kitchen. I still think about that moment, the way he said it. "I just wanted to see how you were settling in." So casual, so off, like we knew each other, like it made sense. The cops think he probably watched me move in, saw my mom leave and took the opportunity. Just some guy walking through an open lobby, stealing a key from a box while pretending to help a friend down the hall. I've thought 1,000 times about what would have happened if I hadn't heard the door close, if I hadn't locked the bedroom door, if my window hadn't led to the fire escape. People say, trust your gut, but I never even got the chance. He was just there. So yeah, I live alone again now, in a different apartment, a different part of town. But I'm not the same. I check locks 3 times before bed. I carry pepper spray when I take the trash out. And I never assume someone in the hallway is who they say they are. Because that day, my moving day, taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes, the scariest people don't force their way into your life. They wait until the door's already open.